Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our panel today. My name is Ryan Fields, and I'm from Amplify. We want to welcome you today to Looking Back and Planning Ahead, Best Practices for our Educators panel. And this is going to be moderated by the Lawrence Hall of Science. And I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping things while we get things started. Before we do that, though, let's go ahead and jump into some icebreakers. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat. Where are you from? Maybe what grades you teach or what grade you service. And maybe what made you want to join today's webinar and a great lesson that you learned this school year. So we'd love to hear from you in the chat while we wait for people. Hi, Dana. Lovely to see you here. Hi, April. Thank you so much for joining us today. Paula from New York. Hi, Paula. Thank you. There we go. We can see a bunch of people now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. With some great helpful tips for today. If you would like to access closed captioning, they are available for this webinar. You can just click the CC button in your bottom tray, and then it will start to upload those closed captionings for you as well. We'd love to hear from you guys in the chat, so please feel free to participate in the chat at any time. But we will be using the Q&A function for this webinar, and we will answer those questions at the end of the webinar if possible. Keep an eye out on your email because you should receive a certificate of attendance from this webinar if you are participating live. And then you'll receive an email from us as well with the recording of this webinar. So just keep an eye out for those things as they come to you in the future. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to Rebecca to go ahead and get our panel started and introduce herself and our lovely panelists. So thank you, Rebecca.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. And I'm so excited to be here. And it was great to see everyone's introductions in the chat. We have folks from all over the country for different levels of the education system. And so for those of you who are watching a webinar later, we have folks from all over the country who are joining us today. And if you're watching this recording later, we're so glad that you joined. So my name is Rebecca Abbott, and I work at the Lawrence Hall of Science at the University of California, Berkeley. And I am part of a curriculum and research group at the Lawrence. And my role is supporting instructional leaders and teacher leaders like our panelists as they implement science curriculum across their K-8 systems. And so I'm super excited to introduce my panelists, and they will give you more details about their roles and their context in a moment. We've got Heather Gansky and Jazmin White from Mastery Charter Schools in Philadelphia, and Katie Harrison and Alyson Kerrigan from sorry, I'm going to say it right. It's Apo School District in Delaware, Appoquinimink School District in Delaware. So they're going to introduce themselves in a bit. And so we're here to learn from their experiences. They've been implementing three-dimensional phenomena-based instruction and to hear about what that looks like at the district level, at the school level, and in their classrooms. And so many of you in the chat said you're really interested in hearing from other experienced educators about what this journey is like. And so that's exactly what they're going to be talking about, what it's been like for them in the past, what they're thinking about for this next upcoming year. And I will say, I know these folks through their implementation of a specific set of curriculum materials, Amplify Science, but their lessons learned are meant to be generally applicable no matter what curriculum materials you're using. Anyone who's working to implement three-dimensional science standards should find lots to learn from them. So I have a few questions to ask them, and all of you can continue to respond or to think about things that you want to chat about and add those to the chat as we go along. And we may have some time for more questions and answers for them at the end. And we also have Shannon and Ryan who are helping us answer questions in the chat. So you can feel free to add your questions in the chat along the way, and we'll see if we have more time for questions at the end, or maybe we can just answer in the moment. All right, so enough from me. I'm really excited to hear from them. So we'll get a quick introduction. We'll have start off by having each of our panelists introduce themselves and share a bit about their school or their district and their context. And we'll start off with Jazmin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jazmin White. I'm a 7th to 8th grade science teacher at Mastery Charter Harrity campus. Our school is located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it is in an urban community. And right now, I think the most important thing about my role right now is being able to push those students onto post-secondary education. So I'm really excited to chat with you all today and to share more about what I do in my role in that school.
And Heather.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Gansky. I am the Assistant Director of Science for Mastery Charter Schools. So Jazmin is one of our teacher leaders for Mastery. She did not mention the most interesting thing, which was her school is based off of, or Abbott Elementary is based off of her school. So that is where Quinta Brunson actually went to school with Harrity. So Mastery has 23 schools in the Philadelphia and Camden, New Jersey region. We do K through 12. My role as Assistant Director of Science is that I work with K to 8 science teachers, doing a little bit of everything, working with curriculum, professional development, and then doing instructional coaching. I'm really, really excited to be here and kind of share how we've done this process over the past 3 years and how we're still learning with this.
All right, and then we'll hear from Allie and then Katie.
Hi, I'm Alyson Kerrigan. I teach 8th grade science at Meredith Middle School in Apo School Districts. I've been there for about 8-ish years, and we've been using Amplify for the past 5 years or so. My school is in a suburban area, pretty diverse. About a third of our kids have IEPs as well, so a lot of experience with that. I've taught 7th grade before as well, and I'm really looking forward to sharing what my classroom looks like.
So I guess it leaves me. My name is Katie Harrison. I am the secondary science coordinator for the Appoquinimink School District. I've been in the district actually 23 years. I spent 16 years in the classroom as a middle level educator. And then I transitioned into this role 7 years ago, actually, ironically enough. And Allie took my place, ironically enough as well. But our district is about 13,000 students strong. We have a roughly 50-50 split in terms of male to female students in terms of the ratio. We're looking at about 18% special ed, and we're looking at 58% minority. It is a suburban district, and it is the fastest growing district in the state of Delaware. And I oversee 7 schools in the grand scheme of things, and it is grades 7 through 12.
All right, well, great. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And in that vein of giving us some context about where you're from and what your contexts are, we're going to start with some questions about how all this started for you. The topic of today is about looking back and looking forward. So thinking about how it all started for you. Katie and Allie and Apo, you first started to make this shift over a decade ago. Delaware was was a partner state in the writing of NGSS. So I know that you all started to make a shift to 3-dimensional phenomenon-based teaching and learning well over 10 years ago. And when we talked a little bit ago, you talked about it being a transition. And so it was for many people as they moved from old science standards to these newer science standards. So I'll start with Katie, and then we'll go to Allie about what that shift was like for you in the past.
The shift itself was interesting. And I say that from a perspective of we had the Delaware prioritized standards prior to the next generation science standards. So when we were looking at our standards and doing the comparison, what we started to notice is in the Delaware prioritized standards, we had essential, important, and compact standards. So we had the list of standards, and then we had them prioritized in terms of what we had to cover, what we needed to cover if we could, and then, hey, this would be great if you get there. And then what we found through doing the analysis of those standards and starting to transition our units was when we were moving over to the next generation science standards, it was like, oh wait, all of this stuff that's like compact down here, oh, that's what next gen is. So as we were doing that transition, and because I've been in the district a long time and a science teacher for a long time, it was a real shift in thinking to say, oh, there's things that we used to not have to get to. Those are the priority things that we now need to get to. And what we now know is the DCIs aren't the things we have to make sure we teach. It's the things we want to make sure we experience. So really, when you started looking what used to be compact, those were much more kind of the experiential pieces. And that's what Next Gen flipped on its head for us. So what I found, because of working even with student teachers over the years, and then working now in the role that I have, that pivot has gotten easier, because as different universities have adopted the standards and different roles have adopted those standards, and the longer we've been working with Next Gen, the easier that's been. It's for people who are old school like me, who had to go, oh wait, this is how we used to teach, and it was a textbook, and this is what we follow, and this was a kit, and we followed what I called shake and bake labs, not because they were bad, but because it was everybody did the same lab, everybody got the same outcome, and then we did the analysis. And we didn't have to do that anymore. Now it's like science is messy and we're getting different answers, and sometimes it doesn't work. Well, why is that? That's three-dimensional phenomena. So then we got the opportunity to do that transition. So the newer teachers coming in, or the novice teachers, I should say, because it's not necessarily young teachers because of alternative routes, but as they're coming in and doing that transition, it's not near the push that it had to be, you know, back when. And that was, for us, I think about 12 years ago now.
Yeah, how about for you, Allie? What was that transition like?
Yeah, so when I started teaching, I was already using the NGSS standards, and going through my teacher education program at the University of Delaware, they were already incorporating that for us. So when I started teaching, it was a very easy transition. I will say there was always, like I remember the kits that Katie was talking about, like that's what I grew up with in school, in middle school and in high school learning about. So then when I became a teacher, I was like, oh, I can't wait to do these. And then it was not that. So it was really interesting to see just kind of what my experience going through the school system and then actually becoming a teacher as well, the difference in what the kids were learning, what they were doing, and how they were doing it. And also just the collaboration with the teachers that had previously used the science kits that the state provided, and kind of switching to how our NGSS alignment was. So it was really an easy transition for me because I don't really know anything different than this NGSS.
Yeah, and so both of you speak about how it was a major shift, you know, from older standards, either that we used as kids or that, you know, used in schools in the past, to what you're doing now. And so how hard that was kind of depended on when you went through it. And so for you at Mastery, Heather and Jazmin, I know you've been sort of transitioning for many years and engaging in new standards, but you really didn't really pick up new instructional materials till about 3 or 4 years ago. So talk a little bit about that, what that shift was like.
Yeah, so I started doing K-3 science. And at that time it was kind of just like whatever curriculum you had, and you kind of just went with the idea that you were doing the hands-on science. That's what you really wanted to make sure you had. Then I moved into my role as assistant director 3 years ago, and that's when we decided, oh, we're going to go ahead and shift to the Amplify curriculum. We're going to adopt NGSS. We're in this kind of weird phase because, like I said, we do Philadelphia and Camden. That's 2 different states. So New Jersey has already adopted NGSS. So that's why we said, you know what, we're going to go with that. And we knew that Pennsylvania was on this like very slow process to get there, but we knew it was coming. And actually this year is finally when they have shifted over to the STEEL standards, which are very much, they're pretty much word for word NGSS. They just like to rename them. I'm pretty sure like that's like a lot of states. They just like to rename them their own special thing. So with that, I will say it was definitely a learning curve. And even 3 years later, now that we've been doing it, it is still a learning curve. The biggest thing that I would say, which Katie mentioned as well, is that you have to learn to not just focus on the disciplinary core idea and the DCI, and getting teachers to understand that the science and engineering practice isn't just the engagement piece. It is not just the hands-on that you might have grown up learning, but it is actually something that you have to teach the students. It is a progression that goes from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. And we saw that within probably the first time we had any sort of like major assessment after our first unit, because teachers were going, well, wait a minute, I taught all about this gecko. And there were no questions about the gecko on the test. And we're like, well, but there were questions about modeling that they had to do, or there were questions about another animal and they were supposed to take what they learned and apply it. And so it's definitely been a curve where I think teachers are now starting to be like, oh, this is the phenomena is the tool, but it's not the thing that we are strictly teaching.
And Jazmin, how about you? What would you say?
So just to piggyback off of Heather, so I would agree. So the shift was exciting, but it was also very challenging. We adopted our curriculum about 3 years ago, but I had only been teaching for a year prior to that. So the entire first year of being an educator, I actually created all of my own lessons using false and discovery education. So it was kind of fun. I'm like, hey, I can teach them how to build out experiments, what the scientific method is, and things like that. And then when we did the shift to Amplify, I'm like, oh, wow, we have like this actual curriculum where it's like step by step. It starts with a big story and it builds on, and it was really exciting. But like Heather said, when it was time to take the checkpoints and the benchmarks, the students struggled. Like the first year, the students struggled, and they were looking at me like, well, this is not what we talked about. And I struggled to figure out an easy path to get them to understand how to connect what we were learning about in the classroom and how to use their own minds and do their own thinking to connect the ideas for some portion of the time. So while I do think it was great that we had the opportunity to work with false and discovery education, I realized that very first year of using our new curriculum that we were teaching them how to retain the information that we were teaching versus how to do the thinking and carry the cognitive load themselves. So that's where we really had to start like utilizing like different systems and how do we really iron out misconceptions and things like that. So I would say it was an amazing shift. It was really fun. It was a new thing that I could like really gravitate to working with. But I would say that in the beginning, it was something that was challenging time-wise and just really understanding how to pivot myself very quickly in the new school year.
Yeah, that's super interesting that, you as teachers or as leaders have your own mindset shifts to grapple around. But I think you talked too about like, oh, the kids are like, oh, wait, this is different from what I'm used to in the past. And when you're saying you're not just learning about something, but you really have to apply these practices or get into figuring something out, that's new thinking for them as well. And so thinking about how you're supporting them and carrying that cognitive load is a big shift for everybody. So yeah, so we'll go on to thinking about, from that long-term big shift to just this immediate last year. That's really some good background and context for the big shift. And so now we're thinking about just this past year and hear about some of your reflections. And so we'll start with Allie and Jazmin, our two teachers, on this question. How has your focus changed now as you've had more time with three-dimensional phenomena-based teaching and learning? And what goals did you have for yourself and for your students just this past year?
So one of the things that I've been focusing on really the last 2 years, specifically with Amplify, is incorporating more things related to like the students' real world and their lives. So one of the things I do with Amplify is I take their progress builds and I turn that into what is called a chapter focus. And I basically say, here's what you were supposed to have learned during this time. Prove to me that you understand it. And they can connect to something outside in their lives. It can connect to another subject. It could be something that we did in class that really kind of resonated with them. And it's really interesting to see them kind of build their knowledge each time we do that. And just related to something outside of just, here's an assignment, do it. Or here's a test, do it. And it's really interesting to see how creative the kids get. For example, with our force and motion unit, when we started talking about collisions towards the end, anytime a kid would see me in the hallway, they would go, hey, Miss Kerrigan, watch this. And then go, I just collided with another kid. And they would talk about that. So it's interesting to see just kind of how their minds shift when you focus more on everything and not just like rote memorization. It's been going pretty well with kind of changing to that. How can this relate to something outside of just what we're learning? And I think that I can see a little bit more of what the kids truly understand and address those misconceptions a lot better than just focusing on one specific phenomena throughout the whole process.
All right, and I would say I agree with Ali. That's like genuinely what I focused on this school year. My goal was to really have the students carry the cognitive load and do most of the thinking for themselves. So what we focused on this last year was really working on driving question boards. That's something that Heather and our leadership team adopted, and we ran with it in our classrooms where the students were actually trying to see, could they ask questions that connected to what we were learning, and were those good questions that we could actually find answers to while the unit was progressing. And I noticed that by doing the driving question boards, they were able to pick out information themselves that was most useful, most helpful to master the objective throughout the day. But then they were also able to come up with questions that helped them push their thinking just a little bit more, and also their peers in their classrooms, because it wasn't like a system where you would ask the questions and the question would just sit there. We would ask the questions, we would post the questions up, and then we would actually pick a question to focus on, to say like, hey, is this a question that we can really answer with the information that we have, or is it a question that's kind of like far-fetched? So it allowed the students to be able to really focus their information, focus their minds on what information is really necessary and important to master what we're actually trying to teach. So that was the goal this year. And to be honest, I think it's going extremely well. That's one of the things that they like ask, are we going to drive a question board with this lesson today? Because now they're using that as an opportunity to show me that they can connect the ideas that we're teaching in the classroom to what they should know in the real world. So I think it's going great.
Really nice. And so, yeah, so that same question to our instructional leaders, Ali and Jazmin both talked about, having students carry the cognitive load, doing a lot of the thinking themselves, connecting it to some real world contexts, not just doing the in-class learning, just as the curriculum, on the curriculum itself. So do those connect to some of the goals you have overall for teachers, or what goals did you have for your teachers in this last year?
Yeah. I mean, Jazmin kind of already said it. One of our biggest goals with Mastery was to include the driving question board this year, but it comes with a bigger purpose where one of our key indicators that we have is for, if we go into classrooms, is our students doing the thinking. And so we took that with science to say not only are students doing the thinking, but are students doing the practices. And that was one of the things we absolutely wanted to see, especially thinking about, I'm sure many schools, you have to put your objective on the board, right? So like we're saying, like, the objective isn't just like, oh, what are students learning today, but what is it that students are doing? And if that's the objective, then that's what we should be seeing when we walk into the classroom. Excuse me. So with that, there are definitely some science and engineering practices that are naturally a lot easier to teach than others. I feel like modeling is like one where, like, it's just really easy. Versus other ones, like engaging in arguments from evidence. Those are harder. And one of the ones that you might not think is harder, but it kind of is the asking questions, because you just think like, oh, it's a question, like, come on, ask it. But especially looking at it from the different grade levels, K-2, you're really just getting them to learn how to ask a question that is on on the topic, right? You started off with the driving question board as a first grader. You're like, what question do you have? And they're like, why is the sky blue? And you're like, we're not talking about that. So really getting them to learn, like, we use our 5 senses. We look at what do we see? What do we notice? So then we can ask questions about that. And then in 3 to 5, getting them to go deeper into that, and they say like, okay, well, what is a question that we can use, that we can investigate, and how do we make an investigatable question? So it's been really helpful for our teachers, I think, to like really just also zone in on specific practices, to say like, okay, how are we making sure that not only are we teaching, but we're including it and incorporating it, so it's not just something like, oh, we hit it today, okay, that was our objective for today, but it is something that lives throughout the unit.
Great.
Sorry, I'm trying to remember something in the process of answering the question. Because I'm fortunate enough, because of being in the district that I'm in and having been there so long, I know where we were when we had to prioritize standards. And I've actually gone through 2 curriculum adoptions, which is like unheard of in science for whatever the reason, in my district, because we had the same thing for a long time. But we had a curriculum prior to Amplify, because we've now been Amplify for 6 years. 6 years. 6 years. So we've been Amplify for 6 years. 5 years? I don't know. It's been at least 5, let's put it that way. So it's been at least 5, but the curriculum we had before was actually relatively good with 3 dimensions. I mean, one of the reasons we ended up transitioning was it didn't do anything virtual at all. Their idea of virtual was, here's the PDF, it's a book. And that was it. And I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work whenever we're transitioning to where we had to live in a virtual world. So we really struggled with that, but it was so aligned to 3 dimensions and experiential learning and doing what we did that we transitioned 10 years ago, almost 11 years ago because of. So when you look at the vast majority of the teachers that I work with in middle school, they've never really known another way unless they've been there as long as I have. And I wish I could say more of us have been there long enough, but I really am, I think, one of the few middle school teachers left in the district that's been there that long. Like when you go back and look at the seniority scales, there aren't many people that have been there longer than me in terms of my district, just because of where we're at in the age bracket. So we really haven't known another way. So when I get to the goals where I'm at and we do frequent visits because of the role that I'm in, I visit my teachers. I average probably 2 to 3 times a month. So I do get to go visit them in the classrooms. I work with them, and it's not always just visiting them on walkthroughs. I get to do other touch points where I'm just interacting with them in schools. So it could just be talking to them in the hallway during a class switch in addition to, but it's always working to meet them where they're at. So my goal is always like, where's this teacher at where I'm starting the year and where can I take them to? And then it's embedding whatever that is, knowing what the 30,000 foot view is to say, this is where we need to get. So how can I keep getting people there? And it's leveraging them up. And I have a lot of latitude because of the role and the role within the district, with itself. So I'm in that sweet spot and I know it. So the district gives me latitude. I've got a good group of teachers. We don't really know any difference. So 3D is not the battle that it was when I was doing the transition in the classroom. Like if you ask the gentleman that's my counterpart, because we have an elementary one of us and there's a secondary one of us, he was the K-12 guy before I got this job. So if you go back and ask him what it was like, I guarantee you will get a different answer for the battles that he had to have with us to switch to 3 dimensions and the goals that he would have had, even looking back at like this last year. So it's always looking at where the teacher is and where they're going to go. So I don't have something super specific for this one, but again, that's because we're in the sweet spot of most of my teachers really don't know not 3D because we've had it. Are there still issues and inroads? Yes. But generally speaking, we're in a sweet spot. So from my lens, I don't have a ton of stuff I have to change from goal setting for me.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And and a lot of times we talk about like system support, that it's not just up to one person to be able to, make changes or to enact, a new paradigm shift, such as the phenomena-based 3 dimensions. And Katie, it definitely sounds like you have that system of support. So that's great. But I do want to push you a little bit on a challenge and something that you're trying to work through. So our next question is about challenge or lessons learned this year. And we'll start with our instructional leaders for this question. Is thinking about our so this is thinking about our moving from those goals that you just talked about connecting to real world and enriching the practices for the students and that kind of thing. What challenges have you been finding that you're facing in implementing 3-dimensional phenomena-based instruction, either with teachers or with your own classroom or with the students, and how have you addressed the challenge?
Twofold. One, not cutting every Socrates seminar that happens to be an Amplify. So not cutting all the stuff where kids are actually doing the thing we want them to do, which happens to be a component of Amplify. And that usually does come down to pacing. And a lot of times, especially this time of year, it's because of testing. And that's unfortunately the nature of the system, because we have modified schedules that we're running and trying to get everybody through the testing windows, because it's not just math and ELA, it's science and social studies, there's field trips, end of year awards, like there's all kinds of things that do impact the pacing. And then there's also how do I want to say it? It's maintaining that sense of urgency, that it's like, yes, this is hard. Yes, this is messy. And it's letting go of that control, because you've got to let the students have the ownership. And not everybody is comfortable with that. Not everybody has the capacity at the same time to say, yep, I'm going to turn it over to the kids and just let them run with it. And I'm going to be the facilitator on the side. So while they're getting so much better at dealing with 3 dimensions and looking at it and saying, for this lab activity or this finite window of time, we can do this, and it's messy, and it's for 20 minutes of a class and a lesson versus an entire lesson, it's not chopping some of those things up. The engineering internships are another one that frequently get cut, just again because of time, and it's the easy thing to cut. And guilty. I mean, it's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. But those are the things that are the real rich experiences. Those are the things the kids remember. So it's really trying to find that balance and going back and figuring out how to reharmonize the pacing and things like that, to say, how do we make sure to keep those experiences, and what's the give and take? Because I know, and Allie may speak to this a little bit, and I'm not saying you have to, by the way, but Allie may speak to this a little bit, because as we've been transitioning to some of the new grading and assessment practices that we're looking at, and looking at portfolios and things like that, as we're shifting the thinking in terms of how to assess the learning, it's also opening up those experiences, which are taking more time. So we may be sacrificing some of this in the short term to really build up how we do feedback and how we do assessment. So it's picking and choosing which hill to die on, so to speak, right now, knowing that we're looking at the long-term games, and then how to the long-term gains, not games, and putting it back into the system later on. So it's, again, knowing where you're going and knowing where those targets are, so that it's like, I might have to take it out here to plug it back in a year from now to know how I'm putting it back into the system for professional development supports, teacher supports, kid supports. Am I going to tier it in at 6th grade to know where it's going to go in 8th grade? So there's a lot of systems thinking that has to go into play with this stuff. So those are some of the challenges, is knowing when and where to push on the system, knowing when and where and who has the capacity. So there are those kinds of things that when you're working with 7 different, like in my case, 7 different schools, and going, hey, they all have their own unique personalities and cultures, and now I have to work with this building leader and that one, and they all are trying to do the right things, and what they see as their priorities, which are not always the same priorities as I have, which, rightfully so, we're all different leaders. So it's, how do we then marry all of those things and keep everything moving forward? Because it's not just science, it's science and math and world languages and. So it's balancing all of those systems in the role that I'm in, which is very different than the teacher role that I used to have. And sometimes I wish for that much simpler role, because sometimes it's much nicer to be able to shut my door and say, I'm going to do what's in my classroom. And now I have to worry about everybody's classroom across 7 schools.
Yeah, super interesting. Heather, yeah, what about you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the systemic issues are the things where, like, what the ideal way it should be done, and then the things where it's like, but we can't do it because of this reason or that reason. So I think we are slowly getting there, right? Like, I think the biggest issue is assessments, right? And how is it that we can assess the NGSS with fidelity when you also are in a battle with, like, okay, but you have state assessments, you have standardized assessments. And if the push is that, you need to give students released items, and those released items are only really focused on the DCI, then how are you really giving them those opportunities and those at-bats? And finding that balance. So something that I have tried to incorporate for our teachers at our schools is to give, like, these chapter checkpoints, which I think you've heard Jazmin say that. So what we try to do is say, okay, at the end of each chapter, if they're slowly supposed to be answering part of the phenomena or explaining it, then what is the performance expectation? How much is it that they're supposed to know? And then let me give you a similar phenomena and see what you can answer at this point. And we do that through multiple choice questions. We try to make it so it's like, here's a 1-dimensional question, a 2-dimensional question, and a 3-dimensional question. So then be able to assess, like, maybe a lot of our students, like, yeah, they're getting those 1-dimensional questions right. It's when you get to the 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional that you're like, oh, you didn't get those. So that is something that I have tried to incorporate to give us as many at-bats as possible, to give us also students many different ways to show what they know. Something else that I'm looking into for next year as well, but also like I love to utilize is for this year is Wonder of Science. They have performance-based assessments that can be like really quickly done in a day or whatever. But again, it's another way to show for students to be able to like, I'm going to model this out instead of just answering multiple choice questions. And then along with that, with systems, I would say kind of working with school leaders too, and getting them to understand what it should look like. If according to your handbook, it says every lesson should start with a bell ringer and do this, and end with an exit ticket. And you're like, but they didn't actually get to the answer yet. They're going to get that tomorrow. You can't get them an exit ticket. So like getting them to also understand like, hey, this is where those science and engineering practices can come in. If you're saying, what did they learn today? Teachers can look for like, what is it that the students are doing, and look for other things. It doesn't always have to be like, here's the worksheet, circle the correct answer. And that's how I know that they've learned.
Yeah, science is not the same as the other subject areas, and that's an important message to pass along. That's super helpful. Yeah, so these are some challenges. And so what about you, Ali? And then Jazmin, what about the challenges that you've found you're facing, and how have you been working to address this?
Some of the challenges I found is kind of like what Katie said as well, just the time to get some of these things done. Again, results in us having to kind of cut some things, shorten some things, skip over some things that aren't as prioritized as, these other parts. But that has decreased the more that I've been doing some of the reflections and feedback throughout the entire school year. At the beginning of the year, it's very much, it takes 2 days to get any type of project done, sometimes more. And then towards the end of the school year, it does take a little bit less time. So that is one of the challenges with implementing some of these things and wanting to see what the kids truly understand and getting them to that level of mastery that they should be at. The other challenge that I sometimes have, and even when like I first started teaching when we were on a different curriculum versus now with Amplify. My personal challenge is just taking those students that are exceeding those standards and definitely know what they're doing, and trying to figure out ways to keep them engaged, keep them enriched, and just trying to make sure that they're not being left behind. Because oftentimes, you're focusing on your average students and some of your lower students, but then the high kids, you just are like, you're going to be fine. Don't even worry about it. And that's where some of those chapter focuses that I do come into play, because I can kind of push those higher kids to be like, hey, yeah, you met this part, but you can go above and do a little bit more because I know you can. So it's cool to see their creativity with it. And again, the kids impress me with those all the time. There'll be kids that I'm like, I don't think this person is getting it at all. And then all of a sudden they turn in this focus and I'm like, oh, they are. Okay, cool. So we're good. So it's just kind of trusting that process of what is happening and allowing, like, trusting the kids to know that they will eventually show what they know. It's just making sure it's in a form that works best for them.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of what Heather mentioned too, about having multiple ways to show their knowledge in your classroom, coming up with creative ways to show that.
Yeah, so I would say my biggest challenge in working with this new teaching style was definitely the lesson facilitation and the time, like pacing. In a perfect world, science is as important as every subject that gets taught in the school. And I think sometimes it's a little frustrating to see that, other subjects have like double blocks to get the information, and you have like this 45 minutes to get so much information to a student that they can be successful for the very next lesson, because the way that the lessons work is that it's literally a continuation. So if you're missing a day, or if you don't understand something the first time we're teaching it, then it's like, how do we balance the students, like Ali said, that mastered it, they got it, they know what they're doing, with the students who are still struggling to understand what we taught the day before, we're going to teach the next day. And I would say that it is not a big struggle for me as an educator to get them to the next level, but I will say it is frustrating to the students at times when they can't understand something the first time, when their peers are understanding it and they don't want to take the time to make sense of what we're teaching. They're like, I should know this already. I want to know the answer. I can't get the answer right. Can you help me? And it's kind of like they want a little bit of the hand holding. And as a person who wants to see the students be successful, it's like, how can I help them make sense of the lesson without giving answers? And as a person that's backwards planning, is like, I know what I'm expecting them to know out of the lesson, but it's like, well, how do I continue to push them? How do I give them scaffolding? And how do I give them additional time to work on a unit when sometimes it's not available in the curriculum for it to be done? So the way I try to address it is just like Ali said, taking out the things that I know are not necessarily going to connect to the standard that they need to master, and trying to find additional opportunities for them to get those additional at-bats. So a lot of the times I'm assigning homework that is directly connected to the lesson. And it might be something that's supposed to be an activity for the classroom, but I might have you do it as a homework activity. We might start the do now with that, because sometimes the do nows are things that are like, oh, okay, they can answer that in 2 minutes and we're giving them 5 to do it. So instead of doing that, it's like, how can I really maximize the time that we're going to spend when you first come in the classroom, because we have such a short amount of time to get so much information in. So yeah, I think overall they're doing a great job at this point, but the pacing will always be a problem because it's so much information. It's just a lot of information. And then I think another thing is just backwards planning and trying to connect the assessments to what we're teaching them as far as the content, because I can understand the question, but sometimes I'm asking Heather, I'm like, Heather, like, this is how I'm thinking right now. Is this exactly what you're asking? Am I teaching it the right way? Because it's another thing when you're sharing something with a bunch of students and then they're asking you questions. You're like, oh, let's parking lot that right now. Because it's like, hey, I didn't even think of that myself. And I don't necessarily have like a huge science background, to be totally honest. These are things that I've done deep dives to educate myself on, because I've been out of school so many years. And then, so for me, it's like, well, they can come up with these scenarios and these questions immediately. And me is like, oh, I didn't even think of this right here as a misconception. So sometimes it's more so like they're getting it, they're making the connections, but are they making connections to the assessments like I'm thinking about the connections? So yeah, those are some of the challenges that I face in mastery with our students.
Yeah, and someone just put in the chat, Jasmine, that's what science looks like. So thanks for sharing. And yeah, and I think, with this figuring out, having a teacher who's learning alongside the students in some ways and facilitating is exactly, is part of the process, and showing, that you're asking questions and figuring things out alongside of them is powerful. And so as we transition to my next question is about making progress in the year ahead. So we'll keep going with you, Jazmin, just latching onto what you were just talking about. You talked about seeing, kids making progress, or, needing that resilience to be able to, see themselves as learners, and it's okay to make mistakes, or to go slow, to go fast kind of thing, or to be okay with, with the process of not knowing the answers right away. What do you think what are you looking forward to making progress on in the year ahead? Whether it's that piece of students' mindset, or are there other things that you're looking forward to making progress on in the year ahead?
I'm pretty consistent. I think that the teaching style I have has been working successfully. So one of the things I try to do is just continue to educate myself first, and then to ensure that I'm doing the right standards. I'm learning it myself appropriately to teach it to a bunch of students. So I focus on how I can do better myself first. But as far as the students making progress, I have this flow that I have for the last 3 years. And it's like RP1 is more so like introducing how the lesson will flow and how my lesson facilitation works. And then report period 2 is more so like, you should be able to come right in. You should be able to get right to the lesson. You should understand that this is a story. This is how we connect our ideas. You have to be able to ask the questions. And then by report period 3 is really, really, it's not tough, but it's like I'm setting those expectations really, really high, because at the end of the year, it's like, what do they really know? So by report period 3 is simply rigorous. And that's how we're going to progress for the remainder of the school year, because at that point, it's like, I kind of held your hand for report period 1 and 2. That's about 2.5, 3 months or so. So now for the remainder of the school year, you should be able to coach yourself. And I think as we continue to like model that same expectation throughout the school year, it sets a standard to the students that when I get to 7th, because I teach 7th and 8th. So by the time I get to 8th grade, they're like, oh, we already know what Ms. White is going to expect us to do. we know she wants us to come in here and have our warm-up set up on a computer, and we only have this amount of time. And so it's not like we're reteaching how to learn in my classroom. Like, we're really going to stick to the basics, and then we build off of each other's knowledge, honestly. And there are some times where I'm like, wow, that student really, really got me today. And there are other times where I was like, wow, like they got this so easily. So I think I'm just going to continue to work with the same flow that I've been doing for the last few years. And hopefully I'll continue to be successful like they are now.
Thank you. How about you, Heather?
One of the things that I am really excited about for next year is I am looking at all the different ways that we can try to take the units and localize them for our students. And I was fortunate enough that I was able to be a part of a Amplify Leaders localization group with Rebecca and Katie. And it was really eye-opening, because I originally went into it thinking like, oh, okay, we're going to change the entire phenomena to make it something that works for our students. And asking teachers to do that along with everything else they have to do would just be, it would just be, we would have no more teachers left. So what we've been able to look at is like, okay, they're still going to get the phenomena, but then how is it that we can make these personal home connections, neighborhood connections, so that students are able to see it in their lives? And so one of the things I'm looking at is, how can we give professional development to our teachers so that they can take those opportunities? Because every classroom is different. They know their students best. But then also trying to give teachers like a starting point. So one of the things that I've slowly started to work on is looking at how we can incorporate a localized homework with each lesson. And one of the ways that I've done that is, like, full transparency, utilizing AI, ChatGPT. And I will take the investigative questions that are part of the coherence flowchart with Amplify, because the investigative questions are universal. It is not just related to the phenomena. And I will put it into AI and say like, hey, here's the investigative question. Let me describe my students for you. Now let me tell you a little bit about their neighborhood. Now here's the key concepts that they're going to learn in the next few lessons. Help me come up with some homeworks. And it is not perfect. Like, it is something where it's like, it'll give you something and you're like, okay, but now change it this way or work this way. So it's not something you can just put into AI and spit out and be like, great, thanks. You got to fine tune it. But it's helped to work smarter, not harder, but also make it in a way that it can relate to students. And a lot of it is like, go home and ask your parents about this, or try to find an example of this in your house, model this. So it's not anything either that's like asking a lot from our students either. It's just getting them to find those connections.
Great. Exciting. All right. What about you? We'll hear from Allie and then Katie about what you're looking forward to in this coming year.
So one of the things I'm looking forward to most, I'm a very reflective person. So usually after each lesson, I figure out what things I liked, which things I should probably change. And sometimes that happens from class to class. Sometimes it happens after each lesson. And really the goal is just making everything more accessible for my students, making sure that they feel comfortable with what they're learning, they understand what they're learning. Or even sometimes if they don't fully understand, is it okay at that point for them not to understand it, because we get to it later. So I think just keeping that in mind as I'm moving forward in things. Again, those chapter focuses this year for me were like the new thing that I did. And I think next year, just trying to kind of refine some of those, and making them a little more clear in their expectations, because I noticed too with some of them as I was going through, I was like, why are none of them talking about this? And I'm like, because I didn't tell them to. Okay, now I need to add that in. So really just kind of continuing with that reflective process, and kind of encouraging my kids to think about it too. I mean, a lot of the things that we do are repetitive, like in the structure that we do. So just getting them to see, okay, we're about to do this again. Last time I did this on it, so maybe make sure I do this on it next time. So just kind of getting that mindset shift for them as well, because kind of built into what I'm doing.
So I'm doing a two-pronged thing this summer where I'm building out a larger leadership team than I already have for science. So I already have department leads, but I have enough teacher leaders and enough other folks that I want to expand that to do some additional course development. So that's part of it. And it's in part because one of the things that all of my curricula lacks in some way, shape, or form is enrichment. To Allie's point earlier when we were talking about the fact that whenever you have kids that get it, what do you do with them? If you go back to a PLC model and you're looking at, the do four questions, one of them is what do you do when they get it? And when you really want to do this right and think about the learning and you want to really have the learning take root for any student, you want to have students that you're looking at and say, hey, I've got kids that really get it. I've got kids that really don't, but I have some space and it's in our curricula and it's in our pacing because we build it that way on purpose, that I want to do some relearning for these guys and I want to do some enrichment for these guys, but the enrichment piece is what we're missing. So one of the focuses that we're going to start digging into over the summer and then we're going to continue with over the next year is really building out those enrichment activities, whether it's going to be through stations, whether it's supplemental pieces. It's digging into what Amplify in this case already offers at the middle level. And then I have high school curricula, obviously I'm digging into, but I work really hard to make sure my middle school and high school teachers get to work together because obviously our curricula complements each other. Our standards are overlapping in some way, shape, or form. And I want to make sure that I see each other as resources. So it's continuing those patterns and trends throughout, those dialogue and the conversations that we're going to dig into to say, what can we do to do it better? And then thinking about what can we systematize? So if there's something that we can take and say, this is a scaffold for this enrichment process, how can we take it and then articulate it from 6th to 7th to 8th to high school? We did that with our last curriculum with how we structured CERs and how we were scoring them. So we articulated the rubric. So this is what the rubric looks like in 6th to 7th to 8th to high school. And we can't do it like 9, 10, 11, 12 because in our high schools, as you get outside of really the freshman classes, kids can take anything once they've had biology and chemistry for us. So we had to make sure it was something that was very open. So it's more of digging back into what's working, what isn't, and then how can we level it up to make sure we have enrichment without taking away from what the high school is going to do, because obviously we don't want to take away from the activities that are going to be taking place in high school. So it's then really digging into those enrichment pieces. And because we've done Amplify now long enough and all of my curricula have been in place in high school long enough, we can really dig into those conversations. So the next step really is looking at how can we do the enrichment piece so we truly can have, here's some relearning opportunities, here's enrichment opportunities, and then now we go back in and go to the next thing. So that way we can really level up what we're doing in terms of our general instructional practices.
Great. Well, this has all been so fabulous. You all obviously have a great depth of knowledge and a lot of reflective practices around the best practices in your implementation of science and moving your students thinking forward and deepening your practice. I know we're running out of time, and Ryan probably has a couple of slides and things he wants to wrap up with. So we'll just end with a quick whip around from each of you just to hear. You've already offered us a ton of advice around engaging students and engaging families and localizing and assessment, how to connect assessments to student learning, and lots of ways to have students show what their understanding is in different ways. But if you were going to give us one piece of advice for educators engaged in three-dimensional phenomena-based instruction, what would that be? And we'll start with you, Katie.
So wherever you're starting is okay. You don't have to be an expert now. It's wherever you come in and go, okay, this is where I'm going to start, and then this is what I'm going to build from. And to make sure you give yourself grace in the process, because it's not always going to be perfect. Sometimes it's going to crash and burn, and that's okay too. So just give yourself some grace and take bite-sized chunks.
Thank you. How about you, Jazmin?
My piece of advice would be to know your students and know their needs, because I think the better you know your students and what they're going to need, the better you can plan for the students and to be most helpful when you're going through this type of curriculum. And similar to what Katie said, like, it is going to be a slow progress, but once you get up and rolling with it for a bit, it will become easier. And in my opinion, it's actually really exciting to work with. So you'll find that you're really, really interested in it once you get rolling with it.
Great. How about you, Heather?
I would say, just in general, this could probably goes with all high quality curriculum, but I think nowadays you have a lot of scripted curriculums, and Amplify is one of them. And I would say that while it is great to have all these resources, you cannot plug and play. You have to be able to internalize the science. And the best way that I have been able to do it, because especially thinking of like, for me, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, I need to like go in and actually read the science before I walk into a classroom. And the best way is to make it relevant to me first. So, and then once I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it. Then I know like, okay, now how do I make it relevant to the students? But I think like if you just look at it and go like, okay, this is what I'm teaching today, it's not going to be successful. You have to internalize it yourself and understand what this means to your world before it goes to the kids' worlds.
Thanks. And I'm seeing others nod to that as well. All right. How about you, Allie? Advice for those out there?
I would say trust the process. Especially I see in the chat, a lot of people are implementing Amplify for the first time too. So what may seem repetitive or unnecessary to you while you're going through and looking at the curriculum, isn't really as repetitive for the kids because this is the first time they're seeing it. So I would say definitely try to teach it with fidelity as best you can, at least the first time through. And then once you kind of learned how the flow is and how the kids are learning it and how they're understanding everything, that's when you can start to kind of make some of those tweaks every now and then. One of the hardest parts for me was not over teaching because they would start asking questions and then I'd be like, oh, and then I'd have to go, wait, we get there. Okay, I got it. We'll get there. We will get there. So I would just definitely say, trust the process. And their support too is incredible. Any of the PDs that I've been to through Amplify and things like that have been very helpful and very supportive. So definitely reaching out if you have questions about something, if you're not sure about anything. It's a really great way to connect with everybody too.
Thank you so much. So to all 4 of you, thank you so much. You've been incredibly helpful to our audience, I'm sure, and both in the chat and to all of you, and also just sharing your answers out loud. I know that your students probably really appreciate you. And to all of you, thank you for spending the time on this very busy end of school year. And I'm sure you're getting busy. You're very busy getting ready for not finals, but testing season and all of that. So I'll turn it back over to Ryan to see if you had any closing slides you wanted to share with the team or with the audience. But I wanted to say thank you to all of you for being here.
Again, yes, thank you all so much. You guys were absolutely incredible. So we appreciate you all so much. Thank you. So I am just going to go ahead and close this out with a few free resources from Amplify. Right now, we have an end of year activity pack that is live and ready for you to download. That's chock full of things like crossword puzzles and word searches, all with science vocabulary and definitions. So it's still applicable to what you're doing in your classroom, but maybe something that is great for you to pull into your class during like some downtime, testing, or those quiet little moments that you have at the end of the school year. So you can access that at amplify.com/science-activity-pack. And if you will want to continue to dive into some of the topics that our educators and Rebecca shared with you today, please head over to our change management site at amplify.com/change/science/change-management. And you can grab all of those great resources like our change management guide, ways to integrate science and literacy together, hit more on some of the topics that these educators shared today. And if you're looking for some additional free resources or activities for your science classroom, head over to our science free resource library at amplify.com/science-free resources. And lastly, we'd love for you to dive into Amplify Science if that's something that you're interested in. Hear more about some of our educators' experiences and what they love at Amplify, what they love about Amplify Science at amplify.com/science/success stories. That's about all the time we have today, and it doesn't really look like we have questions in our Q&A. But again, educators, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you guys on our panel. And then our audience as well, thank you for not only joining us today, but being incredible participants in the chat. I'm sure our panelists have appreciated it today. And a special thank you to you, Rebecca. Always enjoy spending time with you. So thank you for your time and your excellence today.
Absolutely. I was very inspired by all the stories and all the progress made by these schools. So it's my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening, wherever you are, and have a great rest of your week. Bye.